Dobrodošli na panel diskusiju koja je posvećena odnosu vlasti i novinara i čini mi se da nije slučajno što su svi govornici u ovom panelu ženskog roda i izgleda da to sve učesnice su, i možda to govori da su žene hrabrije u ovom našem poslu. Moderator će biti Ljubica Gojgić, pa prepuštam Ljubici da predstavi učesnice. Hvala.
Hvala. Možda će žene biti učesnice, jedine učesnice ovog panela, ali nije nebitno što jedan džentlmen izabere koga da pozove da učestvuje u razgovoru gde tražimo odgovor na pitanje ko koga kontroliše. Novinari vlast ili vlast novinare. Tokom prethodna 2 dana mi smo ovde čuli dosta podrške medijima sa najvišeg mesta, kako uzbunjivačima, tako i medijima. Pre manje od sat vremena ovde ste čuli priču o važnosti novinarskog posla i o važnosti da novinari mogu slobodno i nesputano od vlasti da rade svoj posao. Zato mislim da će ovaj panel biti zanimljiv, zato što vas sada pozivamo da siđete u realnost. Da vidimo zaista kako to funkcioniše, kako funkcioniše u Bugarskoj, kako funkcioniše u Srbiji i kako funkcioniše u Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama. Danas su učesnice panela o odnosu vlasti i novinara Ljiljana Smajlović, novinarka, trenutno kolumnistkinja Nedeljnika, Diljana Gajtandžijeva, slobodni novinar iz Bugarske i koleginica Denise Marie Ordway, urednik u centru Shorenstein na Univerzitetu Harvard. Ovaj razgovor počećemo najslikovitije moguće. Diljana će da vam u jednoj vrlo kratkoj prezentaciji pokaže kako zaista funkcioniše ta podrška slobodi medija i šta može da se desi novinarki koja se usudi da razotkrije priče koje su itekako od javnog interesa, da građanima Bugarske saopšti da njena zemlja u jeku borbe protiv terorizma šalje oružje u Siriju i to oružje upravo onima koje su Ujedinjene nacije stavile na spisak terorističkih organizacija. Diljana, would you please start with your presentation?
Documentaries for one Lebanese TV channel, so I don't work anymore for Bulgarian media. I will explain why, because the topic is media and power. First, I want to start with this photo. I've been a war correspondent since 2011. And when I saw this photo in 2015, in January of 2015, taken by Turkish photographer Osman Sagirli, I was very sad. I cried a lot because this photo shows a 4-year-old Syrian child with her hands raised in surrender. You can see the eyes of this 4-year-old child. This little girl mistook the camera for a weapon, and she raised her hands in surrender. I was thinking when I saw this photo, journalism is really like a weapon. And journalism is as powerful as conventional weapons. Governments and politicians use media as their own weapons. But what happens if this weapon fires back? And how can journalists protect their independence and defend freedom of speech? I will try to share my experience with you so that I can answer the question, who controls who, media power or power media? As a war correspondent, I investigated weapons supplies on 350 diplomatic flights to terrorists in Syria. These weapons originated mainly from Eastern Europe, Bulgaria and Serbia included, and ended up in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Following my revelations, which were based on secret diplomatic documents, I was interrogated by the Bulgarian National Security Agency, and 2 hours later, I was fired from my job without explanation. This happened last year. Chronologically, I will start with my investigation. I published a series of investigations. In December of 2016, while reporting on the Battle of Aleppo, I discovered and filmed underground warehouses full of heavy weapons with Bulgaria as their country of origin. This is the cache with Bulgarian weapons in Aleppo. And here I filmed the result of these weapon supplies. My cameraman almost got killed on the battlefield, and later on I realized that this was a Bulgarian rocket that almost killed us. So the headlines would have been, not a Bulgarian journalist discovered Bulgarian weapons in Syria. The headlines would have been a Bulgarian journalist killed by Bulgarian weapons in Syria. Luckily, this didn't happen, and I was able to come back to my country and to continue my investigation. These weapons that I discovered in Aleppo when the jihadists from Al-Nusra Front, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, retreated from their positions in eastern Aleppo, they were used by the terrorists. They weren't used by moderate rebels. And I was shocked because I realized and I saw myself that my country supplied weapons to terrorists in Syria. Why I say my country? Not unknown people, because every single weapon which is exported must be approved of by a special commission, which includes a couple of ministers plus the head of the Bulgarian National Security Agency, and I will explain later what I mean, why the Bulgarian government was involved. Diplomatic documents which were leaked to me revealed that these weapons were just a small part of a covert international weapons shipment network for armament of terrorists in the Middle East and Africa via 350 diplomatic flights carried out by the Azerbaijan state-run company Silkway Airlines. The weapon supplies were organized and paid for by the US Special Operations Command, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. These documents were leaked to me by an anonymous Twitter account. This happened when I got back to my country and continued my investigation. Here are some of the documents. I want to show the documents to you. First, the state aircraft of Azerbaijan carried on board tens of tons of heavy weapons and ammunition headed to terrorists under the cover of diplomatic flights. Documents implicating Silkway Airlines in arms supplies were sent to me, as I said, by an anonymous Twitter account, Anonymous Bulgaria. The leaked files included correspondence between the Bulgarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Embassy of Azerbaijan to Bulgaria with attached documents for weapons deals and diplomatic clearance for overflights and landing in Bulgaria and many other European countries, the United States, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Serbia as well, to name a few. These are some of the documents. I have published all these documents online. They're in the public domain. If you have interest in the Serbian weapon supplies to Syria, you can have a look. You can Google Silkway Airlines diplomatic flights, weapons, and you will find a link to these documents. And I will focus on the money. The United States sent $1 billion worth of weapons. Among the main customers of the diplomatic flights for weapons service provided by Silkway Airlines were American companies which supplied weapons to the US Army and US Special Operations Command. The common element in these cases is that they all supplied non-US standard weapons, Bulgarian weapons, Serbian weapons, Croatian weapons, etc. Hence, the weapons were not used by the US forces. According to the US Federal Contracts Registry, over the past 3 years, American companies were awarded $1 billion contracts in total under a special US government program for non-US standard weapon supplies. All of them used Silkway Airlines for the transport of weapons. In some cases, when Silkway was short of aircraft due to a busy schedule, Azerbaijan Air Force aircraft transported the military cargo, although the weapons never reached Azerbaijan. The documents leaked from the Azeri embassy to Sofia included shocking examples of weapons transport. A case in point, on the 12th of May 2015, an aircraft of Azerbaijan Air Forces carried almost 8 tons of PG-7 and 10 tons of PG-9. These are munitions, for heavy munitions, to the supposed destination via the route Burgas, Bulgaria, Incirlik, Turkey, back to Burgas, and finally Nasosny, Azerbaijan. The consignor was the American company Purple Shovel and the consignee the Ministry of Defense of Azerbaijan. According to the documents, however, the military cargo was offloaded at Incirlik military air base, which is located just 100 kilometers from the Syrian border and never reached the consignee. The weapons were sold to Purple Shovel, this American company, by Ogans, Bulgaria, and manufactured by the Bulgarian state-run company VMZ, which is controlled by the Bulgarian government. According to the US Federal Contracts Registry, in December of 2014, the US Special Operations Command signed almost $27 million contract with Purple Shovel. Bulgaria was indicated as the country of origin of the weapons. If you want to have a closer look at the documents, I can later on I can send you my presentation to journalists or others of you who want to have a look, because there are many Serbian weapons as well. Such munitions and RPG-7 originating in Bulgaria can often be seen here in some of the propaganda videos posted online by ISIS. Here you can see, you can't, but I will tell you, this is a two-digit symbol which indicates the country of origin and the manufacturer. And if you have a closer look and inspect the video footage of ISIS posted online, you can actually catch the origin of the weapons that they use. They use mainly Eastern European weapons. I will not waste your time with further information. I will just, probably you don't know how in Bulgaria we understood back in 2015 that Bulgaria was used for a secret US program for armament of rebels in Syria. In June 2015, one American national, an employee of this American company that I mentioned, Purple Shovel, was killed in a blast when a rocket-propelled grenade malfunctioned at a military range near the village of Anevo in Bulgaria. 2 other Americans and 2 Bulgarians were also injured. The US Embassy to Bulgaria then released a statement announcing that US government contractors were working on a US military program to train and equip moderate rebels in Syria, which resulted in the US ambassador in Sofia to be immediately withdrawn from her post. after these revelations. Following my report on the diplomatic flights with weapons, the Azeri embassy to Bulgaria requested the Bulgarian National Security Agency to investigate the cyber attack to which they had been subjected. I was interrogated but neither about the Bulgarian weapons in Aleppo nor the diplomatic flights with weapons to terrorists. The Bulgarian authorities launched an investigation into my sources of information, not the information itself. 2 hours after my interrogation, I was fired by Truth Daily without explanation, although I was sent on an assignment to Syria at that point. Thus, I was prevented from getting back to Syria to continue my investigation. In the end, I will just say that I published my report on the 2nd of July last year. Few weeks later, the story made headlines in foreign media outlets, and on the 19th of July, US media announced President Trump terminated the covert US program on arming the so-called moderate Syrian rebels, who, according to my investigation on the ground in Syria, were Al-Qaeda terrorists. So in the end, my opinion is that media control power, not the opposite. They try to control us, but in the end, we win. So I'm very thankful that all that happened to me helped me reach the global audience and somehow spread the truth about Syria and who funded and armed terrorists in this war-ravaged country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Such a positive person. You're saying at the end of the day, we win. I've heard this exact sentence yesterday from 2 people who did make truthful revelations, but were fired. You were also fired. You do not work with daily newspapers. So what kind of a victory are we talking about? Victory for public and a defeat for yourself?
Sorry. For me, it is a victory because I wanted more journalists to get involved because many countries were actually involved. I needed the support of many journalists, not only from Bulgaria, from other countries. And I sent these documents to many journalists and they got involved. And in the end, this program was terminated. And probably I'm a bit brainwashed, but having been a war correspondent, what matters in the end is that somehow we spread the suffering of all these children there, the child that I showed you, to the global audience so that many people know and hold to account their governments. So it's not about me. Well, now I don't work for Bulgarian media, but to be honest, I don't want to work for them because I would not be allowed to be the journalist that I must be. And now I can publish my investigations in different media outlets online. I can do what I'm supposed to do as a journalist, so this is a win.
Great. Liliana, can I ask you, I saw that you were, there was a smile on your face, and I'm tempting you to explain how did you see this this whole story. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you was who controls whom, media power or power media. In one of the reports published by the Council for Anti-Corruption Council, one of the conclusions was that because of the power, financial and political and physical power they have over media, today you can say that it is the elites, political or business, controlling media rather than media controlling them. How do you see this issue? Who controls whom?
First, I smiled at the same place you smiled when I heard that we win in the end. But in Dilena's case, and I am very impressed with this story, and I am humbled by what we've heard, and I have nothing coming close to what she has done in journalism to talk about. I don't know whether we win in the end. I represent, in a way, a series of failures and defeats. So I don't know who's winning, but I would totally agree that Dilena has won, and that sometimes it's possible to win, and I really applaud her exploits, and I thank her for being here. Well, they control us, of course. They have the purse, the strings to the purse, and one of the reasons I resigned my post was that I couldn't come to terms with my manager, who was stopping people, journalists in elevators, and telling them that's a terrible story and our advertisers are going to be upset with us. So yes, we're supposed to be the watchdogs, but they have incredible power over us. And what's more important, we're losing the sympathy of our public. Because, you know, I was for many years president of the Journalists Association, and one year I thought it would be a good idea to try to win the public over by pointing out on Journalism Day that journalists, who are by and large all have university degrees, are paid about, on the average, they earn the median salary of bus drivers in Serbia. Well, let me tell you how surprised I was when I found out that the public, not only was the public not on our side, but they said, what do you have about against bus drivers? Bus drivers are people who earn their salaries honestly. A bus driver does not, you know, when he sees a car coming on the left side, he doesn't pretend not to see that car. He doesn't have a boss that tells him, just continue on and pretend that that other car isn't even there. So we are losing the battle for the hearts and minds of our public, and this, of course, encourages the authorities and the people who hold the strings of the purse to despise us.
When did this happen? What happened to journalism bringing down president? We are now commemorating the 50th anniversary of the student rebels in 1968, where people were protesting, fighting for their causes. Journalists were always allies, not only in 68, but later, in 2000, during the 90s. What happened? How did we become enemies or pain in the neck to our governments?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that I believe in that fairy tale anymore, that we were always fighting for truth and justice and bringing down governments. I now watch what's happening in the US, and I have to tell you something. I am rooting for Donald Trump. I don't want this journalism elite that is really working in, I mean, it has, what I see on CNN and even what I read in the New York Times, it doesn't come close to the ideals of impartiality and the public interest. I see, much as I see in Serbia, a bunch of people who are acting as representatives of an elite that's fighting someone who is trying to overturn an old order. So sometimes we win, sometimes we bring down a president, but I no longer believe that we're just agents for the good. I see my colleagues, I mean, in America, you see it very clearly. there's this informant, and I'm interested in this informant who had been planted in Donald Trump's campaign, because I found traces of this informant having come here. I would say probably also as a CIA agent. Right before the bombing, I saw him coming back. I saw that this informant had been able to interview the highest generals in our army establishment. And the reason I'm talking about this is I'm reading that colleagues of mine that I had worked for the Post, the New York Times, colleagues that I really had the highest respect, that I thought did a very good job reporting from Serbia, they're saying, this spy is not a spy, we'll call him an informant, because we are, in our fight against Donald Trump, the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency, there are allies. So I watch these terrible liars like James Clapper and people like that, and I see the journalists at CNN acting as if those people were not known liars. So what I'm trying to say is that that I think, I mean, I heard Diljana say that the government uses our outlets as weapons. Well, we often use our outlets as weapons in a political war. And what worries me, you know, it's no longer that it's a dead heat between politicians and journalists who is more despised. It's worse than that. People are beginning to hate us. And even worse than that, I think that I detect with some of my colleagues hatred for this public. I think I think we have deserved and earned sometimes that hatred, and it's mutual. So perhaps it's just that I'm older than Diljana, but I'm not as optimistic, but I'm rooting for her.
Thank you very much, Denise. What a wonderful introduction, inspiration for you. Just let us explain a little bit, where do you work? What is Shorenstein Center of Media, Politics, and Public Policy? And what do you do there? And then, please, I'm looking forward to hearing your comments on, since you are training journalists, what do you have to say?
Sure.
Are you training monsters or people who will continue working for the good of the public?
Sure. So I'm the managing editor of a project at Harvard University Shorenstein Center for Media, Politics, and Public Policy. Essentially, the center is a research center. We're looking at issues related to media and politics and public policy and the intersection of those issues and ideas. What I do is I help run a small journalism project. The gist of our effort is to train journalists, to help them strengthen their work by looking at evidence, looking at best practices. I do a lot of training in newsrooms, in journalism classrooms. So I am having conversations every day with journalists in the newsroom, as well as journalism educators who are training people to go into newsrooms of today and tomorrow. I would love to respectfully disagree, but also love to tip a hat to you and your work, incredible, brave work. I was in the newsroom for a little over 15 years and ended my career as an investigative journalist and did what I hope was some really strong, changing work, but my life was never on the line, and I never felt like my job was on the line. I felt like I got a lot of support, but I used it to initiate change. I'm going to weigh in on the question of who has power, and I come at it from a very different perspective. So I feel like government controls access to information and people and processes. Meanwhile, journalists, it's kind of like, in my opinion, it's a daily struggle over who is, and I would stop and say, I, as a journalist, I never felt like I was trying to take power, and I never felt like I was trying to take control. I felt like it was my role to hold people accountable and to kind of shine a spotlight on problems and injustices. So I never felt like I was trying to get control or get someone. With that being said, I feel like it's an everyday struggle where the journalist is trying to get information. The journalist is trying to reveal, uncover information that maybe a government entity, politician doesn't want the public to be aware of for whatever reason that might be. But I will tell you that two other factors that I don't hear in the conversation, in the United States at least, is that another way the government wields a lot of control is that, at least in the United States, the government funds education. So how individual journalists are educated, starting in grade school, into the high school as they express an interest in journalism, and then also in publicly funded colleges and universities. So the government is controlling what journalists are learning and how they're being trained. And then also for graduate programs, professionals, when they come back for professional development, that curriculum is also set by government agencies in public colleges and universities. I would like to add another piece that hasn't been discussed yet, as I feel like a lot of the changes that are happening in journalism, as newsrooms are shrinking, as resources are becoming more limited, as the way journalists are trained and their jobs are changing, I think journalists are giving up some of their power. So that's I think should be an important part of the conversation.
We've heard from Liliana, and that's the second round of questions. Just before the conference started, how do we handle? We live in a WikiLeaks era. We all know who Edward Snowden is. How do we treat today anonymous? And Diljana will later explain what is behind Anonymous Bulgaria. Since you provide training for journalists at the Shorenstein Center, what is your piece of advice? How do you handle anonymous sources?
Depending on the importance of a story, you're going to have a lot of conversations with your editor and legal team, if that exists, on how to handle it. Right now, at least in the United States, there's a lot of scrutiny of journalists and their work. Meanwhile, we've had a lot of very high-profile cases of journalists making up information. We're also living in a time when there's a lot of false information being shared in various forms. Some of it looks very authentic. So we've got to be so careful about authenticating our information before we go public with it and making sure that it's bulletproof. And that's going to be a very, very serious conversation that the editors are going to have with journalists about where did you get this? How did you authenticate it? And taking the editor through the process of making sure that that is good information. But in terms of using anonymous sources, there are newsrooms that my last newsroom I came from about 3 years ago, if it was something that was not of national security or a life-death matter, we had to go, first of all, it was discouraged. We were discouraged from using anonymous sources because of all those reasons. But if we did want to, we had to go through so many layers of administration to get the okay to, in this one situation, use an anonymous source.
There is that famous, allegedly Ben Bradley's line from the movie on Watergate, when he asks Bernstein and Woodward, how many sources do you have for this information? They say 5, and he just, without even looking at them, she just said find the 6th one. Has our practice, Liliana, has our practice changed? Journalist Association. Do we double check? Do we double check our pieces of information? And how does this new setting, these leaks via social networks affect our work? Because we also live in the era of fake news.
Well, first of all, journalists are just like regular people. They like to believe what they agree with, what fits with their bias. So when you're an editor, you have to, you know who you're dealing with, and a journalist comes breathless and says, I have this source that wants to be anonymous. Of course, first you have to ask whether your journalist is sure that that source is a first-hand source, that it's someone who's in a position to know, and you need, as an editor, to get your journalist to describe the source very accurately so that everyone in the public can weigh whether it's a good source or not. But, you know, if Diana did not have everything she has, she'd look like a loony conspiracist. She'd be saying, I saw this happened, and people would, you know, but she's got this. This is why when you're doing something like the Watergate story, you need 6, and in fact, 5 sources wouldn't have helped her without these papers. She would have been so easily discredited and discarded. We would have heard things about her childhood. You know, it's easy to discredit a journalist, but when you are dealing with things like this, when you have this, she is unimpeachable. And that's the beauty. You know, I remember many years ago after the assassination of the Prime Minister, and there was a theft of a vote in Parliament, and I'm sure everyone here remembers that. And the American ambassador at the time stopped me and said, Liliana, there's all this discussion about whether this famous actress was in Turkey or did she vote in the Serbian parliament? Where was she? Was she on vacation in Bodrum, or did she vote for the election of the bank governor? And he said, with all the money the United States has put into investigative journalism in this country, why did someone not send a journalist to Bodrum? I mean, you know, they would come back with... and, you know, I was a little nonplussed, and I said to him, look, I suspect no newsroom wants to spend $2,000, I mean marks at the time, 2,000 marks on getting evidence for something that everyone already knows. It's true. And the vote was stolen. But I've always felt that actually even the American ambassador was right against the Serbian media. We should have spent the money. We should have had physical evidence. It shouldn't have stayed something like whoever doesn't like this party believes that they're thieves, and whoever is of this party says, well, you know, it's not totally certain. And let's not forget that there was a very trustworthy and creditable news organization, a wire service that was supposed to be one of the heroes of anti-Milosevic journalism, that told us this was a genuine vote. We have the document. We have the airline ticket that proves that this actress traveled from Bodrum and took a taxi for 600 marks and showed up in Belgrade, which was all a lie. But a very credible news organization at the time, Beta Agency, was used to plant this fake evidence. So in the end, I would say, if you can get a manager to pay the ticket, we should go to Bodrum, even in minor things.
Liliana, what was written, if you got it on paper, in a decision to fire you? How was that explained, justified?
It wasn't explained and it wasn't justified, but I got a phone call from a secretary of the newspaper where I used to work, and she was very straight, and she said, you need to come and to sign your resignation. I asked why, and she said, the editor is very angry, so please come. And he shouted at me, please come. He asked you to prepare everything for you and you just need to come and sign everything. I phoned to him, to his deputy, and nobody got back to me. So what I did was to publish what happened on my Facebook and Twitter account. Then other journalists asked him, what's the reason? He said, well, we didn't actually fire her. We just terminated her contract because she wanted a long time ago. So all of a sudden, after her interrogation, the same day, 2 hours later, we just terminated her contract. And he said, no, this is not because of the investigation of the weapons. We support this investigation. But actually, they sent me on an assignment in Syria, so they didn't support this investigation because they terminated my contract a few days before coming back to Syria. I'm not angry with them because they're just cowards, and they take money from politicians to support them. So they show to the public that they're cowards, that they don't care that Bulgaria supports terrorism, and nobody trusts them anymore. Now everybody in Bulgaria knows that this newspaper works for the government, and they don't trust them anymore. I'm very thankful to what happened because now people know the truth.
How many people from the newsroom supported what you have done?
None.
None?
They supported me on private messages, but officially no, none of them. I was disappointed because this wasn't the first case in Bulgaria. This happened to many other journalists. I mean, I'm just one of the many who went through this. And I was always thinking I'm a bit revolutionary, probably, but I thought if we all come out and if we organize a protest and we defend our rights, what will happen? They can't fire all of us, but in the end, it is only you alone against the system.
Well, in your case, it was you plus the state security. How was that? How was that interrogation? Has anybody supported you then? Has anybody gone with you to the interview with the state security?
Yeah.
What was the role? I don't know if you have the associations of journalists,
The
trade
Bulgarian,
unions.
the Bulgarian Association of Journalism officially supported me. But when I asked them for press accreditation to have a press card, they didn't give me such. So I would only say thank you to them for their support on words. But when it comes to doing something, defending journalists, this is not how things work. I was very angry when afterwards I published a series of other investigations, and they wrote, our journalist. I'm not their journalist. I'm a Bulgarian journalist, but I'm not their journalist. So it is shameful that such organizations represent journalism. Sorry about that. Probably your organization is not the same like the Bulgarian.
And what about through the daily? Tell us a few words about the ownership. Because some, Liliana told me ages ago that you always have to follow the money. I know it's not the original, but very often if you follow the money, you get clarification for many of your, you get answers to many of your questions. What about Truth Daily?
This is a private newspaper, one of the very few left that didn't went bankrupt. Many of them went bankrupt. We have just 2 newspapers in Bulgaria, 3 private TV channels and 1 state-run TV channel, and that's it. And a lot of online media outlets. That's it. We don't have many news outlets. So if you want to work and to have money and to have adverts, you need to be obedient. Yeah,
that's the tune that we recognize. Denise, this is a common experience. The newspapers are disappearing. The traditional media are disappearing, local ones especially. That's number one. Number two is people are saying the traditional media got detached from what people want to know and want to read. It is new media that are more careful to what people's needs are. Is that true in the States? Is an online media becoming stronger and more credible than the New York Times?
Example, so they are very different from a traditional newsroom. They've got a lot of private funders, and they're using their money to address issues of national importance, but also work with local newsrooms to take on local issues. So that's an example of they're just doing really impressive, incredible work. There are smaller ones that are attempting to speak to more local issues that, as local newsrooms are shrinking and the national newsrooms don't pay as much attention to issues as maybe the public would like. Education is an area that I'm very familiar with. There are a number of smaller digital-only publications that are trying to fill that gap by writing only about education. Two examples are the Hechinger Report and Chalkbeat, which do good work. However, one thing I've noticed, at least anecdotally, is that some of the reporters who tend to work for those organizations are newer journalists, less experienced journalists. So while they're trying to fill a need, there's the challenge with the skill and work that a less experienced journalist can do compared to someone who has been doing the work, maybe investigative work, for decades. And so some of them, I know at ProPublica, there are a number of very experienced, award-winning, hard-hitting journalists. They are, I wouldn't say that they're doing better work than some of our, long-standing, more prestigious newsrooms. The New York Times just does some fabulous work. Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, they just do some really good work. But ProPublica is really hitting it out of the park the last few years. They're winning some big awards. They're using that money to take on investigations that newsrooms, large and small, just have overlooked or haven't had the time or resources to take on.
Mm-hmm. Liana, a few years ago, we had a guest here in Belgrade, former foreign editor of Le Monde, French daily, respectable French daily, who described how the half of the newsroom left Le Monde and they started their own online media called Mediapart, today quite famous in France. And I remember him saying that I decided to quit, and working for Le Monde, it's a very comfortable position. Great salaries, comfortable life. You would be respected in a French society. He, however, decided to quit, and he said, I realized that I edit 4 or 6 pages, and more or less, it's just about ads. None of the articles that I am signing as an editor has no relevance or importance to our readers. That was the moment when I decided to quit, to get how do you call the money that you get when you are severance, to get severance. And the severance, just for us, it was like the severance was about 80,000 euros. And with the support from his wife, he invested the whole 80,000 euros into this new media project. 12 journalists and editors from Le Monde decided to join this venture. You and I belong to the traditional media and still believe that there is a good, honest, important work on this side. How do you see this new versus old media? And the core question is, how important is who is who is the owner. In Serbia, we were taught that the state has to get out from the ownership of all media because that was bad. Now we saw what privatization has brought. We almost lost all the local media, and those who are still existing are owned by the local tycoons, or there is a hidden ownership from some political circles. How important is who pays your check?
Of course it's important, but the Serbian experience is, I don't know how much people here are familiar with the story of this editor-in-chief of a small tabloid called Alo, who got on the bad side of our former president, Boris Tadic. The owner of Ringier company, Mihail Ringier. Ringier is a very powerful European media company, flew in from Zurich just to fire that editor-in-chief, then went to dinner with the president who had complained about that editor-in-chief. Then the next morning, when there was some rumbling in the newsroom, he told the newsroom, no, I did not fire your editor-in-chief because the president asked me. And the proof is that I fired him first and only had dinner with the president after I fired him. So if you can believe that, you can believe anything. But when I was first editor-in-chief of Politica, it was owned half by VATS and also a powerful German media company, and half by the state of Serbia. And to be honest, I don't see that there was much difference between the two owners. The German media company wanted to buy some other property in Serbia, and it was very accommodating to the Serbian government, the same way that Mihail Ringier, who doesn't have to be intimidated by the Serbian president, but there's something on our market that he wants. So it's always easier to cave in or to do a favor to the president than to stand up for somebody's editorial independence. So basically, if you're an editor or a journalist, you're on your own. No wonderful private owner is going to stand up to a powerful government. My experience is that it's better for journalists when the governments are weak, because there are competitors out there and they figure out, okay, if I help these people say something, it might help me. When the government is very strong, or if the government is holding all the cards for what tycoons want and everything, then you are pretty much on your own. And then what you can do is you can resign the way I did and get some, you feel you've done your moral duty because you've tried to create a little diversion and draw people's attention to that. But however, then you get fired within 48 hours and you don't get a severance in Serbia.
Ladies and gentlemen, we were hoping that you would add to this conversation. So please don't be shy. Raise your hands and ask questions. My last thesis for this, my last round of questions for you ladies would be, will it get better? We have a new president in Serbia. By the way, if I recall correctly, he also made the trip, one of the first trips after coming to power of this new political elite was a trip to, guess where, Zurich, to meet guys from Axel Springer. So it is important, clearly important to regain the control over media, and I'm sure that there is not a single owner of a media in Serbia now who hasn't had this kind of enlightening meeting with representatives of government. Is that good or bad? We can discuss. Are these the worst days in our lives in terms of profession? Has it been much better before? Will it be better? I know an economist in Serbia, when you ask him, will it be better? He would reply, oh, sure. Today is much better than it will be tomorrow. So is the future bright? Deliana, what do you think?
I don't know the answer, but I'll do my best to be like this. I found probably the successful formula for me, independence. You really must work as a freelance journalist because you know this feeling when you have spent hours, days, probably months investigating a case, and you're ready and you have collected all the evidence, verified information, documents, etc. And in the end, you wait an editor who has no idea of what war means, who even can't differentiate between type of weapons, and you wait for this editor to decide if this story will be published. No, I don't have this problem anymore. I also set up my own media website. It is brand new, but now I'm preparing another investigation, very serious. In the following months, I will represent this through my own media. I rely on people who support me and other whistleblowers and other independent journalists. So this is how we can win together.
I must be almost rude, and I'm sorry for being nosy. But when you are saying I'm launching my own media, it's the website. Does it pay your bills?
No, I am a freelance journalist now who is doing documentaries for Lebanese TV channel, and this is how I survive. I have noticed something. There is not a single media outlet around the world that can lie to the audience that they don't have interest. No, all of them have interest, no matter who is behind them, no matter if this is a private or state-run company. You just need to find a place where, no matter who is behind, you can publish 100% of your investigation without being censored. This is what I want, and this is what I do now.
Liliana, sorry, I have to switch to English. There is a question over there. I just wanted to remind the audience that you've seen other times. You were a journalist and editor with Oslobođenje from Sarajevo. So that was the former country. Then you saw changes during 90s, after 2000, after 2012. Is the future bright, or do we have a reason to be worried or pessimistic?
Now I'm going to contradict myself and say that these are the best times for journalism, and that what's coming, it seems to me, is better. So there was a time in the communist era we were well respected. We pretended to do journalism, and they pretended that we were real journalists.
Have I heard you well? These are the best times for journalism.
Yes. Yes, I think this is the best time for journalism. I think I'm an advocate of confrontational journalism. So I have not seen as much confrontation in a long time. I remember a time when there wasn't a single, and not so long ago, when there wasn't a single opposition outlet where you couldn't hear or read. I mean, you and I worked on a case where I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, the European Union, the European Commission conducted research here. And they found, I think this was in 2011, they found that the coverage of the European Union was this. 50% of all the coverage was favorable. 49.5% was neutral, and there was no critical coverage. And I remember that the European Commission was shocked, and the next year they commissioned another report where this was all phrased a little bit differently, but it was true, Ljubica, it was true.
Yeah, it is also
So-
true that the media that you're referring that I used to work for has ceased to exist for political and financial reasons, that some of the best journalists lost the opportunity and their posts with media, and I think it's shameful and makes our world poorer.
I just want to correct something you said. You said that Alexander Vucic had traveled to Zurich to speak to Alex Springer. Well, they doubt it. Ringier is in Zurich and Alex Springer is in Germany. But the point is this, and you referred to that excellent analysis that the Council for Anti-Corruption had done. Well, there's a difference. In the former governments, they were bribing the media to be on their side. And they didn't have to bribe them very much because the elite that controlled most of the media was kind of in cahoots with the government, not because they were bribed, but because they were on the side of that government. They were ideological bedfellows. But when Vucic came, he developed another trick, which is, in a way, I agree, more insidious and more dangerous. He didn't bribe the media. He starved them of public funds. So suddenly Blitz, which had been getting these incredible contracts, hundreds of thousands of euros to investigate ecology, which came down to the Minister of Ecology being praised to high heavens in Blitz and no investigation taking place. When the new government came, what they did is simply cut off those public funds. And then, well, maybe they redirected them, but as a matter of fact, we didn't find that redirected money because these other outlets have truly no overhead, very small costs, and we can call them the worst tabloids. In the meantime, new things are happening, and I wish we could see the money trail. But I'm just saying that this government just learned a new trick, and it took us a while to face that. And of course, B92, which I loved, is gone. But we do have to put some of the blame on those wonderful private owners to whom we sold B92, and they promised us, and they were those wonderful private foreign owners who were supposed to adhere to high European standards, but they didn't, did they?
Denise?
So I will say that I'm kind of struggling with that question. I'm really excited to see what the answer is going to be, but I'm struggling with it, and this is why. Looking at the American landscape, it seems like government leaders, politicians are becoming more and more polished in the way that they use communication strategy to manipulate the media, to control their message. They're becoming much more polished. They're getting really good training from media strategists and from colleges and universities themselves. I've sat in classes. It is eye-opening what the information they're getting and how they're learning to do this. At the same time, really strong journalists are leaving the field for a multitude of reasons, everything from salaries to people being upset that men and women there continues to be a gap in pay for strong women journalists compared to male journalists. There's still, the problem with, who's in leadership at newsrooms, who's making decisions. But then also the changing ways we're doing our job. I remember when I left the newsroom about 3 years ago, still being so passionate about the work I did, still feeling so passionate that what I was doing was bringing about good, positive change for people who maybe weren't informed enough or didn't feel confident enough to bring about issues on their own. So I felt like I was doing good work, but my pay was low. The responsibilities I was asked to take on a daily basis. So I was trying to hold people accountable. I was tweeting. I was posting videos. I was being asked to do so many more things than I had been doing when I started the field. And it was so frustrating because I felt like it took away from what I really wanted to do. So there's a lot of great frustration. I know that's shared by a lot of journalists. So with that said, there are also some really exciting things going on. Going back to the question of local journalism, I lament the changes in local journalism because I feel so strongly that it's so important. While all this emphasis continues to be placed on national questions and national issues, you're leaving these local government leaders and politicians to do what they want. But there's a lot of efforts going on right now in the terms of fellowships and investigative scholarships and partnerships between national organizations that have money to partner with these local newsrooms to do this good work. I mentioned ProPublica again. I'm just so impressed by what they're doing because they're doing great national work. And then
would you go back from your? Would you leave your Shorenstein Center and go back to New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, Pittsburgh Post Gazette? That's my newspaper.
Oh, I will be back in the newsroom. I will be back in the newsroom. Absolutely, absolutely. But if I could add my one last thing in terms of what I'm excited about, you probably see more of a reliance on data journalism and journalists the use of data becoming much more sophisticated as another tool to hold government agencies accountable. It is an important weapon. It is hard to use. I know there's the myth of journalists being scared about math. There's a lot of math in it, but it is such a compelling way to do our work.
Thank you very much. There is a question.
Press and media freedom. My question concerns safety of journalists. We've seen that between October 2017 and February 2018, 3 people were killed. Daphne Caruana Galizia, Jan Kuciak, and his partner Martina Kushnirova. And this was a strong indication that journalism has become really a dangerous job, a dangerous profession. At the same time, in other regions, for example, Southeast Europe, starting from Serbia and other countries like Kosovo, Bosnia, Montenegro, we see a lot of lawsuits against journalists where politicians and companies claim compensations of hundreds of thousands of euros, and very often these are what we call SLAP lawsuits, which stands for strategic litigation against public participation, where the aim of plaintiff is not really to win the case, but is to drag journalists in long court procedures so that in the end they have a chilling effect on them, so that journalists are discouraged from reporting about this person. And my question is, how do you see this legal and physical threat impacting journalism in the future? Is this, especially the physical threat, is this something that happened and there is no indication that it will happen again, or do you feel like scared that it might be repeated? Especially considering the environment which the politicians create by organizing smear campaigns against journalists, naming and shaming, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Who wants to take the question? Denise?
Sure. I can speak to it partially. Based on my experience, I know a lot of times when we'll go to a government agency or a politician and ask for public records, whether it be related to a lawsuit, whether it be related to an investigation we're doing, and they will not give us the information for whatever reasons they cite, and sometimes they don't seem to be very good. The legal team will get involved a lot of times and step in and say, you need to give us that information. Sometimes that works. Sometimes after the conversation with the attorney, they'll realize, oh, okay, it is a public record and I can give it to you. Sometimes we have to go to court. And the problem is that the news organizations who can afford to go to court are the big ones with money. And the smaller ones who don't have as much money, they're kind of left. Maybe they don't even have an attorney to help them. And they might have to go to a nonprofit organization. And that's problematic. So the news organizations that are larger, they get the help, where the smaller ones don't, and that obviously is going to have a chilling effect.
Liliana, would you like to comment? Since maybe it's a good moment to remember that we, the journalists of Serbia, are still waiting for the answers about the murders of a few colleagues of ours, Nada Vujasinović, Slavko Ćuruvija, and Milan Pantić, among others, and journalists who've been kidnapped and killed in Kosovo, right?
Well, let me first refer to what I think Flutura is talking about, whether it has a chilling effect when politicians sue us. And I'm in court all the time, not so much by politicians, but and I have a friend who's my pro bono lawyer. Otherwise, I would have had to quit journalism. I mean, it's impossible to pay for that. If Diljana had been a Serbian journalist, I assure you the Association of Journalists in Serbia would have paid for her to sue her company for her wrongful dismissal. And we do that here, but that's not enough. But I have to say that there have been cases recently in Serbia where a very powerful person, the Minister of Interior, who is very close to President Vučić, sued a magazine, and far from having a chilling effect, because the court ruled in the favor of the magazine, I think in the end it turned out a very good thing. But we didn't think it would turn out that way, and we screamed to bloody heaven when it first happened. So sometimes it can have the opposite effect if things turn out right. I've always felt that a journalist, if what they've written is true, and if they have corroborating evidence, and they did not have any, what is the word in America where you can, malice, if there was no malice involved, the journalist should be able to rest easy. But the one time that I said to myself, okay, I'm clearly in the right, I'm not even going to bother anyone, I went to court and I was defeated. I was convicted immediately. And afterwards, with the help of friends, lawyers, this sentence was overturned. So it's a miserable existence to go to court, even if eventually it'll be ruled in your favor, because you waste a lot of time and it's intimidating. I'm sorry, Ljubica, I lost track of, but yes, we should make it very uncomfortable. We should be able to create an atmosphere where politicians who sue journalists should lose some popularity and reputation when they do that. And it is also true that our colleagues get smeared. There are smear campaigns against our colleagues, but some of those journalists have been winning their cases, so that kind of has had a reverse effect, at least in Serbia.
The last question we are going to take, because it's time to wrap up, is from Professor Milicevic of the Anti-Corruption Council.
Government of Serbia. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate his panel on really tackling issues that are down to earth. We should focus on those issues, not only on the legislature, because the legislature will be the way it will be, and it will not really affect the integrity of the journalists and how the journalists work. I would like just to make a comment. Ljubica has mentioned the student uprising in 1968, and let's try to follow the timeline of the media. In 1968, I was a member of that uprising. That uprising was essentially very benign. It did not demand a change of the system. It demanded a change of some liberties, a change of social issues. And at that time, there was no possibility of the media, mainstream media, to follow in a positive way the uprising, and it did not. And then after 8 days, Tito used the mainstream media to convince the students that changes will occur that never occurred, and the leaders got busted, and that's how it all ended in a failure. But if we look at the way the media developed in Serbia, most of the positive media that really helped us in our struggle against Milosevic have changed by 2010. In 2011, the Council has pointed out that something was happening in the scene media scene, and that was the change of ownership. It's not the problem of the change of ownership, it's a problem of non-transparent change of ownership. And by 2013 and 14, 50% of the media, mainstream media, had non-transparent ownership. And in 2015, we published a report showing that a huge amount of public funds could be funneled into the media by hardly detectable methods. And that was affecting how the media was functioning. The amount was about 800 million euros in 4 years. It's not negligible in a poor country. So what I really want to stress is what has really happened with the media aside from the change of ownership. First of all, we were in the process of privatization that was some 10 years later than the countries around us. And there was a lot of experience in conducting corrupt activities and much less experience in combating corrupt activities. So the media has slowly changed. And what has it produced? We always point out two things. First of all, we must look at how correct is the basic information. Our stand is very clear. There are no free elections, and there is no free public opinion unless you are informed. Now let's look at some examples. We are full on the electronic media of analysts. We don't even know who calls himself an analyst anymore. And when they start perpetuating some wrong information, then it's like an avalanche. People start believing things that never really happened. And you form public opinion in a way that you are really worried. You want an example? I will give you an example. The happenings in the Sobranje of Macedonia that evening when there was violence, we had analysts all over the TV telling us that it's a new era, a dawning of a new era, big changes, nothing really happened. And one other thing that maybe I would like to pose as a question is, are we not really realizing that there has been a change of generations in the newsrooms? You see, I've had the pleasure of talking to John Nesbitt, who was a futurologist and who was one of the people. And he told me, there's no Walter Cronkite, you know, you can't expect such journalists anymore. And he said, I belong to the generation that read newspapers in New York cafes in those big wooden frames. He said, today, I read newspapers from the back. I said, why is that? Because I only look at the sports results. That's one place I know they cannot lie.
Much about the public support for our work.
So if you look at that aspect, you look at the Washington Post, it has its profile, but it's a known profile. But what has happened here? We have allowed a dissociation between the mainstream media and the public in a very, very different way. We have allowed tabloidization and what we call in art kitsch. We have allowed rude behavior, uneducated behavior, and that has become a form of communication. But behind the scene, we have something else. Tabloids can bring down any person who thinks different and not be held accountable. And that is a big problem. Okay. And my question would be to all of you, this dissociation between, let's say, written media and serious media and the general public, educated newspaper reading public, has it some roots in the change of generation? Because the new generations in the newsrooms are focused on different problems in life. And if you look at the new generation, they have all the information they need at the tip of their fingers. But do they have the capability of analyzing the data, looking back, and really realizing what the data produces? I'm not so certain, and I believe the media will focus on everyday events, and the things that we held media so important for are going to fall back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. Sorry? Okay, but you should be aware of the time. Brief comments. Diljana, would you start?
In brief, I graduated from journalism from university in Sofia. So I was taught journalism by my professors and lecturers. They were from the communist regime, so they were about 70 years old, something like this. So what I learned was from the hard way from my experience. Yes, there's a change in the generations. What I noticed recently is that investigative journalism is almost dead. I don't know, especially in Bulgaria, there are no more investigations. Or the journalists who try to investigate different issues, they don't follow basic rules. They focus on the surface of the things, not they don't delve deeper and deeper. So there's a change in generations. For good, for bad, yes, this is a tendency that I have observed.
Thank you. Lilja?
Well, I'm afraid you've helped me make my point again. I think you have just complained about people's opinions and said that they were wrong. Well, maybe they're wrong, but we who do not like kitsch, we who do not like tabloids, we who would like people to be better educated and more elegant, etc., I think we'll just have to live with the fact that those people that we disagree with also have a vote, also have a point of view, have the right to be heard, and have the right to elect whoever they want. So that would be my reply.
Thank you. Denise?
So I have two comments. One is absolutely, I've seen in newsrooms there that the people who are coming in new, fresh out of college, are coming at journalism sometimes in a very different way than I did when I first graduated. In some ways, that's not so great, in my opinion. In some ways, you know, it's refreshing. They're bringing in a new set of tools that I never had and still don't have in terms of accessing information, using the internet to their advantage. You know, they're engaging with readers and audience members in a way I was never able to, and there's strengths to that. With that said, I think that this generation of new journalists, it seems more obvious to me that there's a separation in terms of how the media approach the public, and I feel like a large proportion of the media today are way better educated, come from, in many cases, better, wealthier families, and so there is a situation where you've got a public, a working class public, a poorer public, kind of looking at the media going, you don't represent us. You can't connect with us, paired with the media maybe not doing as much as it should to connect with and understand that community.
Vlado?
Izvinjenje što oduzima malo vremena, ali htio sam samo Diljanu da pitam. Prošle godine, čini mi se, u isto vreme kad ste vi objavili svoje istraživanje, ovde je BIRN objavio istraživanje o... Razumeš? Dakle, BIRN je objavio priču kako Srbija izvozi oružje teroristima u Siriji. Ali tu uopšte, čini mi se, nije bilo pomenuto da Amerika učestvuje u tome. Jeste li videli to istraživanje i šta mislite o njemu?
I got it right. Why BIRN didn't mention the United States and their involvement?
They wrote the story about Russian shipments, but not the American as well. Serbian.
The answer is that they are funded by American sources. And because they also published my documents, you saw some of the documents. BIRN also published these documents a few months after me, without quoting the diplomatic scheme, the U.S. Special Operations Command. Then they were presented awards international for best journalism. If this is best journalism, to hide the organizers of the weapon supplies on diplomatic flights to terrorists because they give you money, then I don't want such an award.
Hvala vam najlepše. Profesore Milićeviću, ako smem ja da kažem na kraju, vi dolazite iz medicinske struke. Ja mislim, nauka se menja, ali načini kako se leče ljudi neka baza ostaje ista, čini mi se, bez obzira što sada možete operacije raditi, a da ne sečete, da ne otvarate čoveka nego nekim drugim. Ja mislim da i u novinarstvu, bez obzira da li će biti na Twitteru, da li će biti u novinama, na televiziji, postoji neka baza koja ne bi smela da se menja. I vrlo je bilo ohrabrujuće, Ljilja i ja smo bili na slušali jedno predavanje, bivši australijski premijer, je li tako? Gospodin Rad je rekao, kada iskoristimo ove nove igračkice, telefone, kompjutere i kada iskoristimo sve mogućnosti, vratit će se svet jedan korak unazad, vratit će se pa i novinarima koji izveštavaju istinito i koji imaju profesionalni integritet. Ja volim tako da razmišljam o budućnosti naše profesije. Hvala vam puno što ste nas pažljivo slušali i ostanite na sledećem panelu.